Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for being with us. My name is Wendy Cadge, and on behalf of Shelley Rambo at Boston University and all of us at the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, we're really excited to have a wonderful conversation planned for you today. We want to talk today about innovations in chaplaincy education, and I'm going to present a very brief background. Shelley's going to talk about some work in progress, and then we're thrilled to have Victor Gabriel, Lori Garrett-Kubina, and Allison Kestenbaum here to talk about the innovative work that each of them are doing. We have a little grant opportunity to announce at the end of the webinar, and there'll be time to take questions. Trace Haythorn will be moderating. So thanks to everyone who made this possible. Michael, do you want to give a few technical instructions before we jump right in?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have questions that you think of as we are moving through the webinar, you can use the question function on your control panel on the right-hand side. You can also use the chat if that's easier for you, whichever. The Q&A will happen at the end, so just be mindful of that. You can drop your questions in there as you think of them, but we'll have that at the end. The session is being recorded, like almost every one of our webinars, so don't worry if you miss something or miss a point or whatever. We will have this up on the website in the coming days, and so you can go review them or share it. I think that's just about it, Wendy. I think we can get underway.
Great. Could you share the first slide, Michael? Okay. So I'm the sociologist in the group, and my job is to say just a few words about the context in which all of us are thinking about chaplaincy and spiritual care education today. Obviously, at the moment, that context is deeply shaped by the pandemic and all of the work that chaplains are doing to support so many people in the midst of it, from healthcare to social movements to police chaplains. We're also very aware of all of the movements around Black Lives Matter and racial injustice, and committed to doing all we can to continue to make sure that as broad and range of a set of people in the US and around the world are in need of spiritual care can receive it. We're committed to all of the principles of full equity and justice. So a couple of quick slides about numbers, just to kind of give us a quick reminder that we know that American religious demographics are changing. We know that those traditionally larger groups, Catholics, mainline Protestants, are on the decline. We know that the number of people who are unaffiliated with any religious tradition are on the increase, and that those trends continue. In the course of these changing demographics, we've done some research about what's happening in theological schools. Michael, the next slide. And we know that theological school enrollments have been declining more or less since 2000. We also know that there's at least one area of growth in theological education, and we think that that's in programs focused on training people to do the work of chaplaincy and spiritual care. Michael, that's the next slide. So we've gathered data, and we estimate that about a quarter of theological schools in the United States across religious traditions and backgrounds have some sort of a degree program specifically geared towards chaplains or spiritual care providers. Many more than that have single courses, and we did some additional research. I'll put, when I'm finished here, an open text paper that describes the history of these programs and some of their curriculum in the chat box. But as we've done additional research, we've seen that not only are the number of theological schools training chaplains growing, but the number of people who are doing units of clinical pastoral education, which is the next slide, have also been on the increase, at least since 2005. The shape that these different programs take varies. So the last slide I have for you here shows that some of the theological schools are offering degree programs connected to Masters of Divinity. Some have started MA programs in chaplaincy. Some have connected this work to the DMin programs or PhD programs or certificate programs. And it was out of this research that Shelley Rambo at Boston University and I began to think about how to bring the theological educators as well as the clinical educators into a common conversation so that we could really think together about how to increase and strengthen the training that chaplains, if people looking to become chaplains, receive. Shelley, you want to say a bit about that effort?
Yes, I apologize to the group that I'm only able to access this by through audio, so I apologize. But I'll talk through a couple slides. Michael, do you want to move to the? Yes. So Wendy just mentioned that we received, starting in 2019, a grant to bring together what I would call stakeholders and educators in chaplaincy education. And you'll see here we have 21 theological schools represented, 35 plus educators. And what we mean by educators are theological school faculty and CPE educators, as well as about 7 social scientists and historians like Wendy, who are kind of mapping what's going on in the demographics around chaplaincy. So our question was whether there's a bigger endeavor around theological education and chaplaincy that this group, who largely had not been talking to each other before. I mean, people are working within their various institutions and settings. And our big challenge was to think, if we bring the strengths of our institutions, our teaching and our research together, really to ask the question, what is possible? Michael, next slide. Thanks. And so what we know, some from the graphs, the quick run through that Wendy just gave, there's a lot of curricular innovation happening within theological schools. We know that there's interest, there's a lot of degree and program development, but this varies a lot from school to school. So when you look at the different kinds of programs, the question of whether anything is shared and what is shared, the similarities and differences start showing through. And we're very aware that people are doing amazing work, but often in silos, but also in sectors of chaplaincy. So military chaplaincy or healthcare chaplaincy, but often those folks aren't in conversation with each other. So we had all these people in the room last summer in Boston, and again, we just are completing our gathering this year. And so we're looking at this curriculum, and we're asking, I think, a couple important questions, which is, as these programs are developing and as there's innovation happening within theological schools, I'm speaking as a theological educator from BU, the question is, in the development of the program, to whom are we answerable with the program, with our programs? And we did something last year, which was let's hear from students who are graduating from our programs and also employers who hire chaplains, and ask them what we refer to as the demand side part of the question, which is what do these folks, what do employers need chaplains to do? What are the skill sets? What are the competencies? And what we found in that room was the great need for feedback loops, from those who are preparing chaplains to those who are hiring chaplains, CPE educators coming back and speaking to theological schools, for students to be talking to their schools and employers. So it was a very rich, and you'll see here this picture of a panel of chaplaincy employers, from healthcare to the military to prisons and healthcare higher ed. And we just, pitched them the question, what is it, what do you look for in hiring a chaplain? Michael? Thanks. So our group set out, we realized that we can't change degree programs at schools. That is too formidable a task. So we really looked at what resources this group of 40 plus could provide to the field of chaplaincy. And so we're working really hard. We have been over the last 6 months and continue to do so on really 2 products, which is a textbook on an introduction to spiritual care and chaplaincy, which we hope can be used in a variety of settings in theological schools, CPE settings, and also some web-based case studies that could really feature some of the skills and competencies in developing those for chaplains. So we've got these 2 resource sets. And you can see, if you're looking at the PowerPoint, we've organized them around competencies that chaplains need: interpersonal competencies, organizational, and meaning-making or theological competencies. So you can imagine this is a huge task to do collaborative writing and collaborative design. It brings its tensions and challenges, but also we think will make a significant contribution to each of our settings. We also are mindful to keep commitments of diversity and justice as central to our work. This is a multi-faith group. And we're very mindful in this current moment, not only of the challenges around COVID, but also the challenges around anti-Black racism, and thinking a lot how our work is different this year than from last year even. Michael? Great. So there's some concerns you could probably add to this list. We become, from what we're hearing from our group and outside, from chaplains working on the ground, is we're concerned about the pipeline problem of is there access to educating chaplains from traditionally underrepresented groups? We're very aware of responding to the changing religious demographics for students who may be coming into theological schools who want to be chaplains but don't identify necessarily with a particular religious tradition, often called the kind of spiritual but not religious group. We're also aware of that we're teaching, or the need to teach students to translate the work of spiritual care to care partners and employers. So largely when they're in theological settings, they're learning religious and theological language, but how well is that translating into the different settings and sectors for the work? We're also mindful of the high cost of theological education and attuned to questions of student debt and the salaries that students will be making as chaplains. So keeping some of those really tangible challenges of employment and debt and things like that is central to our work. So those are just some of the things that have come up and the projects that we're working on, that it's been an incredibly rich conversation, and we really trust that this group is able to bring kind of really amazing resources to chaplaincy education. Thank you. Trace? Is Trace
Yep.
there?
We'll welcome our panelists to begin their presentations now. We'll start with Victor Gabriel. Victor?
Hi, I'm Victor Gabriel. I'm very honored to be here with you guys. I also would like to say that at the very beginning that since I'm representing a Buddhist university, that this place, me being at this table is due to the work of progressive Christians and Jews and our African American brothers and sisters and all the other people of color. Also, I want to say my main point. My main point is that we married our program very early on to ACPE and ATS. And because of this marriage, it has been very fruitful for our university. We have seen an increase of enrollment, the visibility of our program, the coherence of our program itself. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I am I come from a multicultural family. I come also from a multi-faith family, and having that background helped me to understand, to be able to code switch, and also to understand the various gatekeeping that various religious communities have. So I use that as part of getting my program where it is today. So I'll talk a little about my program. The Buddhist Chaplaincy program at University of the West has two programs, the MDiv and the Doctor of Buddhist Ministry. I was chair from 2014 to 2000. And 2020, and so during this time I got the help of various colleagues from various institutions, Dwayne Bidwell from Claremont School of Theology, Rabbi Rochelle from AJR, to make our program fit into the ACPE model and the ATS model. Previously, there were two starts to our program, but they never received any accreditation because they were too Buddhist focused, and the students graduating from the program could not communicate to their employers, could not communicate to their peers. So we did this change mainly for students to be able to get employment. So some of the changes we made was that we, using the Christian model, we read into our Buddhist texts examples of spiritual care and drew that out for our students. We also made the program interdisciplinary. The students were able to take classes from the religious studies department and also from the psychology department and also the business department for their non-profit management skills. So that was the program as it is or was. And currently, okay, so there's been some changes in the Buddhist chaplaincy field, is that the younger students want or continue to seek, they want to learn to preach, to teach the Dharma using styles drawn from Christian homiletics. So that's what we've seen. And also to explain rituals in context of sacramental theology. So I am giving a description of what has been successful for my school, and I'm also drawing you some of the some of the directions that our students want to see the program take. Yeah, and I think that is all I have to say. Thank you for my piece.
Thank you, Victor. Laurie Garrett-Cabina, we'll turn to you.
Thank you. Hello, I'm happy to be here. My name's Laurie Garrett-Cabina. I'm at San Francisco Theological Seminary, which is now, in the last year, become a part of the University of Redlands. So one thing that I've really seen is that transitions happen in the educational world. You know, there's an overall concern about financial viability, of course, curriculum, what are we teaching our students? But one thing I found helpful for me when I came into the seminary was that higher education has a long history of deselecting certain people from being able to the opportunity to even get that education. So the opportunity that I had as an African-American woman to go into this institution and establish a CPE program alongside and with the degree programs was quite an opportunity, and I felt a responsibility. So there were a couple of things I kept in mind for myself. One is a quote from Cheryl Strayed. She says, "The place of learning is a fierce place." I found theological education a fierce place, a place where I was called to be fierce. And what that meant was that I had to develop allies. I had to find ways to create partners. And a lot of that work I did invisibly, so as not to draw too much attention to the work. I have to say, when I came into the program, into the school, it was with a huge gift from a donor who was an alumni. So I came in as a faculty person in endowed chair. Some of the longtime faculty at my institution weren't in endowed chairs. It was a program that wasn't welcomed, really. 15 years ago, they weren't looking to hire a person who taught chaplains, who taught spiritual care through the model of ACPE. So it was a lonely place for me. But I sort of had this understanding that places of learning are fierce places. And I also have this personal kind of model that I have that says the world is poised for healing. People are poised to be healed. And so that together with understanding that for me, learning has to meet actual needs, that service-oriented learning had to transform the learner as well as improve the lives of those who are being served. So while I made choices to as much be financially solvent as possible. So I continue to find ways to allow, give people an opportunity to give to the program. I feel like people need an opportunity to give, and I don't mind asking them because people want to give to things that they care about. So I would search out those opportunities, and that in some ways kept me from taking the perception that I was taking money from other programs or other needs in the school. And because that was happening, I could just do my work and focus on it. What has happened in the last, I hear an echo, but what's happened is that we have a concentration in chaplaincy in the MDiv. We're developing a 3-year chaplaincy MA. I've developed a doctorate of ministry in chaplaincy research literacy. I have developed certificates so that, and through the certificate, some people will, like we particularly have one in trauma, so and a certificate in sort of introduction to research. Some people come and do the certificates and find they want to do more study. We also have connections with the community, so that my connections with the community aren't about necessarily seeing how they meet my need. It's always with the ideal, sort of a spiritual assessment. What is the need in this community, and how can I be a part of supporting them live out their mission? And then if I can be a supporter, that is, if I can care for other organizations, I find that I have students who can help with that in their settings. So we have a community-based program. So we're in, for example, we support hospitals, military, other institutions, a lot of nonprofit agencies. We serve a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't be served because they can't pay for it, such as those who are unhoused, living outside. We support people who are in rehab, that is drug and alcohol rehab facilities. We support people in congregations, and we do that across the broad religious landscape. I mean, I'll just give you a quick example. Our school now has bathrooms that aren't gendered. That's because of the CPE program. Because the CPE program had the first transgendered rabbi in our program. So these subtle changes come, in this development of resources, development of allies who can be served themselves by being my ally. But one of the critical things is to go from having allies to having co-conspirators. So I always need co-conspirators who will help me transform the organization itself. The ally is different than a co-conspirator. So an ally might say, yeah, I read that book and I really support what you're doing. A co-conspirator will put their body on the line for me, will take the risks that I take. And one of the reasons I can take maybe more risks is because just as a Black person, I always feel like I'm going to be the first one fired anyway. I'm in a risky situation. I always hear it when I have students who talk about they need to feel safe. Yeah, that would be great if learning were safe. But learning is risky itself. Transformation is scary. This time that we find ourselves in now, I find the destabilized, we're all destabilized. This is a great opportunity for me to make changes, push at the seminary in a way that undoes something that they do. And so I'm not so much looking for stability this time. I'm looking to see how I can leverage the instability and the power that's coming out of different movements for justice to have to push the institution I'm at and the students I have to different levels of caring, actually meeting needs that are there, and seeing the needs that are uncovered by this pandemic and the police violence and the political corruption. So I understand that whatever happens to, in sort of biblical words, we'd say the least of these, but whatever happens to Black and Brown and Jewish and Muslim, whatever happens to us ends up happening to everybody. And so since sometimes it's the first to come to us, I feel like a responsibility to always be undoing as much injustice and always creating a more caring world as I possibly can in my small segment of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. We'll turn to Allison Kestenbaum.
Hey, everyone. I recently came across the term innovation ecosystem, and I think that describes well what Shelley and Wendy and the Luke Foundation support is cultivating through the Educating Effective Chaplains conversations, which this is a part of. Innovation attracts and nurtures further innovation, especially in our field, which is why these kinds of gatherings are so generative. This panel is a case in point. I had the privilege of serving on a panel with Lori and Victor last year, and I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that I think about what I learned from them, at least on a weekly basis, particularly Lori's experience and the valuable risks that she's taken with fundraising and development, and Victor's partnerships and the academic integrity and the education of chaplains. Both have made a huge impression on me, as they have done again today. Shelley suggested that we each locate ourselves in terms of education of chaplains and offer an insight about education and trainings for chaplains. So I'm a Jewish and certified lay chaplain and also an ACPE certified educator. I currently work in healthcare, but I've also supervised CPE in a seminary and with students in contexts such as disaster spiritual care, prison and reentry settings, higher education, elder care, and hospice. Just as a side note, I would love to see chaplain educators taking clinical sabbaticals to learn in different settings, because it has been so valuable to me personally to be in these different arenas. I currently live and work in San Diego at the University of California, San Diego Health, which is the academic teaching hospital in the region. And half of my week consists of running and serving as faculty for our in-person and online CPE programs, which are focused mainly on palliative care, at least through this year. The palliative care focus is thanks to funding from the Community Health Foundation, but really because of a very cohesive interdisciplinary palliative care team that gravitates toward excellent clinical mentorship. So when we were thinking about where to start our new CPE program back in 2018, palliative care was the natural fit. The other half of my weeks include serving as a staff chaplain with outpatient palliative care, doing telemedicine and in-person care for people with cancer, neurological, and other life-limiting illnesses. And I'm also really committed to developing the evidence base of spiritual care and contributing to chaplaincy research literacy where we can put that in. In terms of an insight about chaplaincy education, I'd like to offer two primary questions that drive our program. The first is, we would never accept other members of interdisciplinary teams, at least in medicine, to take care of us without a standardized education and credentials. So why in chaplaincy, especially now with all the vulnerable populations we're encountering as we go through a global health crisis? When I think about this question, it occurs to me that just because there is standardization and credentialing in any field, it doesn't mean that there aren't severe disparities and biases in those constructs that are actually limiting participation in any profession. So I'm going to choose to assume, at least for the sake of this conversation, that the diversity of chaplaincy education pathways is in part a way for our profession to push back against those systemic injustices. And yet, standardized training and credentialing does make a positive impact on vulnerable people's lives. So a guiding question our program uses is, how can we remove barriers to clinical chaplaincy education while, of course, holding learners accountable? So much of the diversity of chaplaincy education tend to relate to factors such as cost, ability to maintain livelihood while going through training, and access to educators and peers from diverse racial, cultural, and religious backgrounds. At UCSD, we're thinking about how we can address some of those inequalities to better reflect our patient population through our caregivers. I'll share just a few quick examples, and back to the idea of innovation ecosystems, some of these examples of how we try to remove or at least mitigate some of these barriers have been inspired by other chaplaincy and medical education programs and models around the country. So one is cost, trying to find philanthropic support for scholarships. Technology is a big one. So I've learned so much about this from other educators and programs around the country, but technology can really promote diversity of learners, clinical settings, and just more affordable access to CPE that still has great integrity and impact. Another concrete example is a lot of residency programs tend to be moving toward requiring a prerequisite unit of CPE. So where can students from diverse backgrounds get that prerequisite so that they can go on to a residency that's actually going to pay them some kind of stipend and give them some benefits that they can live on as they move in their pathway toward pastoral and professional development. Another thing that we do are part-time and half units with mixed placements. So our institution has been very supportive of a student spending some of their clinical time at UCSD and providing that direct care to patients, but also, for instance, we have a student right now who's working with a community hospice, and we've been able to create a clinical arrangement through ACPE standards that allows that student to gain credit through their work in the community. So these are just some examples. And then I mentioned that there was another question that also drives our program that I'd like to offer here. So we know that people make medical choices, which are some of the most important decisions of their lives, based on their values. And values oftentimes have spiritual or religious backgrounds to them. So it stands to reason that these decisions are informed directly and indirectly by spiritual leaders. So what can all people gain by there being more meaningful encountering and connection between community spiritual leaders and the medical caregivers who are largely facilitating decision-making? Our current program gives community clergy a significant taste of the medical setting and medical providers a meaningful access to spiritual leaders. We know this is transformational for all of them because they keep telling us that this is the case. When people in the community find that people in their care are dealing with spiritual distress and spiritual illness, there are already bridges that have been built so that it's not a clash, but rather the culture of the community and community religious and spiritual life and the health setting could be more familiar on both sides. And I would say that anyone who's spent any time in a clinical or a practicum setting where life and death are regularly encountered, there's a bond that can develop between people no matter what the background, and we see that developing in our program. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak about our work, and I look forward to further discussion and feedback, and I pass the virtual mic back over to Trace.
Thank you, Allison. It's great to be with all of you. We have a couple of questions that have come in. I'm going to start with Victor. You talked about aligning with ACPE and ATS requirements for your program. Tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that. And there's a second question about did this cause you to feel like you were loosening yourself from your grounding within Buddhist tradition, and especially a question around contemplative praxis? You're muted. Hang on.
Oh, yes. Okay. We followed the general guidelines of ATS and ACPE, like, you know, religious education. They don't specify what kind of religious education. They are church history. We transform that into the history of Buddhism and the institutional history of Buddhism. So you can see how we did that. No, I didn't feel, you know, so because I have this multicultural, multi-faith background, I didn't feel unmoored from my Buddhist foundations. Many of my stakeholders did, and it was a gradual process. I did not make this change overnight. I made this change over at least 2 years. 2 years of carefully thinking and moving pieces to, as you know, so like, okay, so I think those who are familiar with the Christian model know ministry of presence, right? And if you look through the entire Buddhist canon, which is like a bookshelf, you will not find this word ministry of presence in traditional texts. However, there is presence, there is present moment, being totally immersed in the present moment, and the wealth of knowledge and resources being immersed in that present moment. So we translated ministry of presence into being present, and the mind and its connections to mindfulness. So I hope that shows how it can be done.
Yeah, I think that especially that emphasis on mindfulness really helps clarify a traditional Buddhist position within this, as opposed to trying to make it a Christo-Buddhist model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So we did not aim for that Christo-Buddhist. We aim for Buddhist true, you know, really grounded in our scriptural tradition, but speaking to ACPE and ATS standards guidelines.
That's great. Thank you very much. Lori, there's some questions for you that are along a similar vein. First, just in terms of the DMIN program that you described, are there particular undergrad or master's programs that you think feed into that DMIN and research well? And then also, have you developed, because of the commitment to social justice that you articulated, are there particular courses you've developed in social justice and Black liberation theology that are a part of this as well?
So I'll start with the second question, I think. Because I was concerned about diversity at, this is just an example, at my institution, we didn't have a diversity officer. And that may be true of a lot of standalone theological seminaries. I felt like there needed to be someone focused on diversity. So I wrote a proposal to the president saying, I'll be your diversity officer and deal with and help the institution come into a more just and inclusive and open opportunities, and also deal with some of the distress that students were feeling. Living in the small, some kind of suburban town where the seminary is located. That added work for me, work that I wasn't paid for, but it also allowed me to go to conferences for diversity officers. There's an association of the diversity officers in the nation, and bring back to the seminary. We did a anti-racism training. We did a climate study, that is to get the climate of the seminary, which was surprisingly, alarmingly upsetting. Actually, what students felt, some of the attitudes and values that the student body had. And of course, there are classes. In fact, every class I teach, no matter what it is, whether it's organizational system or trauma and grief, or they all deal with aspects of racism, sexism, classism, ableism. All of them do. A result is that it's distressing for some students to look at these issues. So I think one of the biggest, one of the challenges I always deal with is the resistance to really engaging that material. But the other thing is this is what you will engage, because this is what has to be engaged to create a more healing world where there's more well-being. So again, there's this a risk in the classroom that I'm willing to take, that I feel like almost like anything else would be a waste of time. So I just want to do good work that I can do in the time that I have. So that's kind of how I look at it. What was the first question?
Any prerequisites that you would recommend for a doctorate of ministry degree at SFTS, specifically in research? So are there things somebody needs to do in an undergrad or a master's program to be equipped for that?
I think whatever master's people get will equip them. I don't like to make a lot of prerequisites if it's up to me, because again, that affects access and opportunity. The institution itself has some ideas about prerequisites. When I started the CPE program, for example, at my institution, I didn't require a college degree. And I got pushback about that from my institution. So, but the school requires a master's degree and at least 3 years of practical experience. So I don't have any other prerequisites. I figure they come into the training, they learn about research. I want to have chaplains do research projects that can go toward being published. I worked with the institution because research is almost always done in a team context, particularly in healthcare. So the institution agreed that students could be on a research team and each could turn in, it could be the same project, but written up from that student's perspective. So I did some things, and also I didn't want them to have to write a long dissertation. I wanted them to write publishable research. So the school, the DMIN program was willing to make some of these adjustments to promote chaplaincy. I want chaplains to publish. I want them to do research. I want them to work with others. I want them to find people to do statistics and sort of join the Academy of published integrity in their research. And so I did have to work with the institution to actually change some of their prerequisites so that it would really benefit, I think, chaplaincy as a whole.
Thank you. Time for one more question before I hand it over to Paul to talk a little bit about our work with Wabash. Allison, let me direct this one to you. We started at the beginning by talking about the shift to the spiritual but not religious and unaffiliated populations. How are you thinking about that, and how are you working to address that growing group? I can imagine that in San Diego, you probably see more than a few folks who come across in their applications as being not identified with particular faith communities. Tell us how you're thinking about that and how it fits within your understanding of what a CPE program ought to be working with.
That's a really big question. that I will just humbly try to address just from our experience. I think that affiliation, and then even more so endorsement or even ordination, all of these terms, with a particular denomination or faith tradition is somehow wrapped up in, what I described as, some of the way that, there's some of these like just systemic factors that are there that maybe have not been questioned that are now starting to be questioned. So I kind of lump that in with that, meaning that if someone comes to our program and applies and doesn't have a that particular kind of affiliation, what we're really looking for is some kind of ethical accountability. Where do they have a home? Should they, hopefully it won't be that should they get in trouble, but that they find themselves needing, spiritual and ethical guidance in their work that they do as chaplains. So we kind of keep that broad. And then just to let you know, I'll just give a shout out to one of our students who was doing they are from a particular faith tradition, but they were doing a master's in divinity in the area while doing their CPE, and we were able to work it out so that some of their educational time with us was their work on their thesis about spiritual and not religious patients and their spiritual needs. Work that in as a research project. So, just some of the threads that we've heard here, that some of it is practical, some of it is, the contributing to the body of literature about this. Because, I think that if we have more literature on what it means to provide spiritual care to people, or to train individuals without a particular spiritual or religious background, that's going to continue to give it more legitimacy. So that's just a quick thumbnail in the short time we have.
Yeah, there's a whole lot more we could do with that one. So thank you for trying to at least hit some of the highlights. I think that's actually a topic that we will see a lot of academic and scholarly work on in the next few years. And we're going to see more and more internationally as well. We're seeing the same trends begin to show up in places that have been traditionally thought of as a singular religious tradition and not so much anymore. Thank you to all three of you. Let me take a moment to invite Paul Myhre into the conversation. Paul's going to share with us about a new Wabash initiative that we are doing through Boston University. Paul?
Well, I thought, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to be here today and to be a part of this webinar, to Shelley and Trace for their good work. I think they could address their project in particular better than I could. We're happy to support it through our grants program. For those of you who don't know, who are listening to the webinar today, the Wabash Center for Teaching and Learning in Theology and Religion is involved with helping faculty think about teaching and learning in colleges, universities, and theological schools. And we provide a number of different types of programs, workshops, colloquies, grants from $5,000 up to $30,000, a consultants program. We publish a journal. We have a mountain of resources on almost any topic you can think of in relationship to teaching and learning in theology and religion. We've tried to help people going to our website by starting to collate those into simple pages that they can find maybe some of the best resources on various topics. So recently we collected one on teaching justice in response to all of the efforts that people are trying to engage around the country, Black Lives Matter, et cetera, anti-racist work. Then we also have another one on teaching during crisis, which pertains to the obvious multiple pandemics that we're moving through right now, one of which is COVID-19, but others are, as you know, as listeners, economic crises of pandemics. There's the justice movement that's finally gaining, I think, a significant amount of traction. And we have a particular grant that we're offering there, up to $5,000 for projects focused on pedagogies that encourage students to critically engage with learning experiences involving social justice and civic engagement. We are really hopeful for this particular grant project, and all of these programs, you can just send me a note, myhrep@wabash.edu in relationship to that. Right. So obviously, I could talk all about these programs for a long time. We offer podcasts, webinars, all sorts of different things through the Wabash Center website. You can find it at Wabash, WABASH dot center, CENTER, and you'll find a direct link to our Wabash Center webpage.
So
With regard, go ahead. Who says?
thank
Is
you,
this
Paul.
Shelley?
This is Shelly. Yeah, I'm sorry I still can't get on video, but I wanted to say some words specifically about this grant. And I want to thank Paul. Paul will be one of the kind of educational consultants on the grant, so we'll be one of the mentors along the way. Trace and I realized that after the conversations that we were having in the loose cohort that many faculty need more support in thinking about and developing chaplaincy focused or spiritual care focused courses. And a lot of them are working with minimal financial resources. So how can we support a cohort of faculty who either want to propose a new course in chaplaincy and spiritual care, or already have one, but that want to redesign the course? So we applied for the Wabash grant, and we're thrilled that Paul and the others found it to be a fundable project. We have money to support 8 faculty in the redesign process, which means we are opening up a call for applications right now with this public webinar. And it's really over the next year, we'll be looking at the course that you're teaching together. You'll be getting feedback from a cohort of people across different schools. Paul will be involved, Trace will be involved. And we're really interested in putting in front of faculty some of the kind of statistics and data on chaplaincy, some of the things that Victor and Allison and Lori are talking about, the research in the field, how people have developed programs, and really ask the applicants to respond, what does this look like then if you're teaching this course for students who are entering this exciting field of chaplaincy work? And so we're thrilled to support it. We hope that you apply. We hope that you encourage faculty at your theological schools to apply. I was really struck by Lori's comment about leveraging instability to move to other and deeper levels of caring. I think that is an incredibly timely message. Many of our theological institutions, many of our chaplains are experiencing, budget restraints. It's a scarcity model. There's a lot of insecurity. And I really am taking Lori's words to heart about how we can take this moment to work together to move to other levels and deeper levels of caring. And we really want to thank the Wabash folks at Wabash for saying, this is valuable work. And thanks, Paul, and all of you at the Wabash Center for making this happen. So thank you.
We're glad to do it. We love to support programs that are trying to make a difference in theology and religion and teaching of theology and religion in North America. And so your project is one of those. And I really encourage those who are listening and tuning in today to apply to be one of those 8 persons. And if you don't get in, I encourage you to apply for something else that we offer through the Wabash Center. So lots of possibilities for good work to be done.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Shelley. Michael, any final words as we wrap up today?
Just to remind everyone that this has been recorded. And so if you came late or missed anything, don't worry, it'll be on the website. And then also, just as a reminder, there are a couple of things in the chat box. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can join our private Facebook group, which is it's a very active and thriving community. So I would encourage you to do that. And then finally, register for our musical and spoken word event tonight with Sons of Serendip at 7 p.m. That's going to be on Zoom and Facebook Live, so there are lots of ways to be there. Please come join us. All right, thank you all. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.